Have you ever stayed in a marriage so long that you began to forget where you ended and where he began? Have you ever been told you're overreacting, too emotional, too needy, until one day you realize you've been slowly disappearing under the weight of someone else's selfishness? That was Clara Reynolds' life for nearly 8 years. She was the quiet strength behind her husband, Ethan, a marketing executive who strutted through life as if success owed him something. On the outside, they looked like the perfect couple, a modern suburban dream in Charleston, white-columned porch, a golden retriever, dinner parties with friends who called them goals. But inside that house, the air was heavy with what wasn't said. Clara had once been a designer, full of imagination and warmth. Over time, she became Ethan's reflection, whatever he needed her to be, whenever he needed it. He called her steady, but what he really meant was silent. At first, she thought the long hours and late nights were just part of ambition. She'd make excuses for him when he came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. "Work dinner," he'd say with that same half-smile, loosening his tie. "You know how clients are." And she did know because she believed him. For years, she wanted to believe him. After all, what kind of wife doubts her husband over a trace of lipstick on his collar? But the truth has a way of whispering louder each time you try to shut it out. It started with the phone left face down at dinner. Then the sudden gym memberships. The business trips that turned into weekends. And the worst, those tiny, offhand comments meant to make her feel small. "Not everyone can handle a high-pressure career, Clara," he'd say when she shared her designs. "Maybe if you were busier, you wouldn't overthink so much." Those words chipped away at her, piece by piece, until even her reflection in the mirror began to look unsure. One night, she found a text. It wasn't even hidden, her phone had buzzed beside his. She saw it flash on the screen before he could grab it. Last night was worth every risk. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Who is she, Ethan?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on, Clara. Don't start drama over a joke." But the joke was her. And for the first time, she felt it deep in her bones. The humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet rage of realizing she'd built her life around a man who never intended to cherish it. That night, she didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just went to bed in the guest room and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. And in that silence, something inside her shifted. The next morning, she packed her laptop, a few clothes, and her grandmother's gold locket, her one reminder of a love that had once been pure, and walked out. Ethan didn't even follow her. He assumed she'd be back by dinner. After all, she always came back. That was his mistake. Clara spent the next few weeks living in a small apartment near downtown, one she'd found through an old friend. The walls were bare, but the air felt light. For the first time in years, she could breathe. She started sketching again, not for clients, but for herself. Lines turned into patterns, and patterns into something that looked like hope. Still, the loneliness came in waves. The evenings were the worst. She'd sit by the window, sipping tea, wondering how she could feel so lost and yet so free at the same time. Then one afternoon, she received an email that would change everything. It was from Harrison Grant, the CEO of Grant & Company, a luxury brand she had once dreamed of designing for. He had seen her online portfolio, sketches she had quietly uploaded to a small designer forum, and wanted to meet. At first, she thought it was a scam. Why would a man like him, a man known for billion-dollar acquisitions and magazine covers, notice her? But the message was simple, polite, and strangely personal. "Your work has soul," he wrote. "Let's talk." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. It had been years since anyone saw her, not just the shadow beside her husband. That meeting would set the stage for everything that followed, for the love she never thought she'd find again, and for the reckoning Ethan never saw coming. But back then, Clara didn't know that yet. All she knew was that someone finally looked at her work and saw more than lines on paper, they saw her spirit. So she went. And when Harrison Grant shook her hand for the first time, it felt less like a business meeting and more like a beginning. He was calm, confident, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His eyes lingered, not in the way Ethan's used to, with calculation, but with curiosity. Genuine interest. "You have a rare touch, Clara," he said, turning one of her sketches toward the light. "It feels human. Like it was drawn by someone who remembers how to feel." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "I suppose I've had a lot of practice." He smiled back, but his gaze softened, as if he sensed the weight behind her words. That's what makes real art. Pain turned into something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe her pain could be worth something. As she left his office that day, the Charleston breeze swept through her hair, and for the briefest second, she didn't think about Ethan or the betrayal or the years she'd lost. She thought about the possibility. But back at home, Ethan was already realizing the one thing he'd never imagined, that the woman he thought would never leave had finally learned how to live without him. And when a man like that loses control, he doesn't surrender quietly. There's a strange kind of peace that follows heartbreak, not quiet, not easy, but clean. Like a storm that's finally passed and left everything sharp and glistening in its wake. That's what Clara felt in the weeks after her meeting with Harrison Grant. For the first time in years, she woke up not to a man's demands, but to her own possibilities. Her designs caught on faster than she could have imagined. What began as a few sketches turned into a full collaboration. Harrison's company, Grant & Company, was launching a new collection, something personal, soulful, built on the idea that beauty can come from brokenness. And who better to capture that than a woman who had lived it? Within months, Clara's name began circulating through Charleston's fashion circles. Her pieces were described as intimate, honest, and achingly human. People wanted to know the woman behind the work. She was invited to design at charity galas, art showcases, even small-town exhibitions where strangers stopped her to say, "You make me feel seen." And through it all, Harrison was there, steady, encouraging, but never controlling. He became her mentor at first, then her confidant, and slowly, something more. One evening, after a long day reviewing fabric samples, they stayed late at the office. The city lights glittered through the glass walls, and Clara caught her reflection beside his two people standing side by side, neither trying to overshadow the other. Harrison glanced at her. "You ever think about what you've built since the day you walked away?" She smiled softly. "Every night." Then after a pause, "It still surprises me that I had to lose everything to find myself." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Sometimes the loss is the gift, Clara. It clears the noise so you can finally hear your own voice." That night, for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt powerful. Whole. But back across town, Ethan Reynolds was unraveling. At first, her absence had been an inconvenience. He assumed she was having one of her episodes, as he used to call them, emotional spells he believed would fade once she realized no one else would want her. But as weeks turned into months, something started to gnaw at him. He saw her name mentioned in a magazine article, Charleston's rising designer, Clara Reynolds. The same Clara whose ideas he once dismissed as childish. The same woman who used to cook dinner while he texted other women under the table. He told himself he didn't care. But when his coworkers mentioned seeing her on Harrison Grant's arm at a fundraising gala, laughter and wine swirling around them like they belonged there, something inside him burned. "Grant," he scoffed aloud in his office. "She's working for him?" Grant & Company was a world Ethan had tried and failed to enter for years. He'd pitched campaigns to them, chased partnerships, and been brushed off every time. And now his ex-wife, the woman he used to belittle, was standing beside its CEO. That irony stung like acid. He started calling her again. At first, polite messages, "Hope you're well." Then, angrier ones, "You think this is funny?" Acting like I never existed. Clara ignored them all. Each time her phone buzzed, she'd glance at it, feel the familiar chill in her stomach, and turn it face down. She had spent years being silenced. Now, silence was her power. Still, a part of her couldn't help but remember. The way Ethan used to look at her with that smug certainty, the way he assumed her forgiveness was endless. And every time she remembered, she sketched harder, lines sharper, colors bolder. Her art became her defiance. Then came the night of the Savannah Gala, an annual event filled with Charleston's wealthiest and most influential. Harrison had invited her as his guest, not his employee, not his designer, but as the woman he admired. When she arrived, heads turned. Clara wore a midnight blue satin gown, its neckline simple but elegant, her hair pinned loosely with soft curls framing her face. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she simply looked like a woman who had stopped asking for permission to shine. Harrison met her at the bottom of the marble staircase. "You look radiant," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. She laughed quietly. "I feel free. But freedom has a way of drawing the eyes of those who once took it away." Across the ballroom, Ethan stood frozen near the bar, his drink halfway to his lips. He hadn't been invited, he'd come as a guest of a mutual contact, hoping to network. The last thing he expected was to see his ex-wife descending the staircase on the arm of the very man who once ignored his business proposals. The chatter of the crowd faded for him. All he could see was Clara laughing, confident, glowing in that gown that seemed made of light. She caught his gaze for a fleeting second. It wasn't planned. It wasn't cruel. It was simple recognition. But to Ethan, that single glance cut deeper than all her silence combined. He tried to steady himself, straightening his tie, smirking as if unfazed. But his hand trembled as he set down his drink. Harrison noticed. "You okay?" he asked quietly as they reached the center of the room. Clara followed his gaze, saw Ethan standing there, older somehow, smaller, his arrogance stripped bare. "I'm perfect," she said softly. "Better than I've ever been." Harrison didn't press. He simply placed his hand at her back, guiding her forward into the circle of bright lights and murmured admiration. Behind them, Ethan watched, feeling the first flicker of a truth he had never faced. The woman he thought would crawl back to him had become someone he couldn't even reach. And as he stood there among the crowd, surrounded by laughter that no longer included him, Ethan realized too late Clara's silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of her rising. Jealousy doesn't announce itself, it seeps in quietly, disguised as regret. For Ethan Reynolds, it began as a dull ache in the back of his mind, a question that grew sharper with each headline, each photo of Clara smiling beside Harrison Grant. The morning after the Savannah Gala, that ache became a storm. He sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. There it was, an article from a local society page. Rising designer Clara Reynolds stuns at Savannah Gala beside Grant and Company. CEO Harrison Grant. The accompanying photo captured the mid-laugh, Harrison's hand gently resting at Clara's back. She looked radiant, confident in a way Ethan had never seen before. The comments underneath were a dagger to his pride. "They make a beautiful couple. Good for her. She's glowing. That woman deserves the world after what she went through." Ethan's joy tightened. He slammed the phone down and muttered, "Glowing, huh?" She always needed a man to make her feel relevant. But even as he said it, a hollow ring echoed in his chest. Because deep down, he knew she didn't need Harrison Grant. She had become her own light, and that terrified him. Over the next few days, he convinced himself that he just wanted closure. To talk things out. But what he really wanted was control, to remind Clara who she used to be, and how much he believed she still owed him. So he showed up. It was a crisp Friday evening when Clara and Harrison hosted a small private exhibition at the Grant and Company Gallery, an intimate event showcasing Clara's first official collection, Resilience. The name alone felt like a declaration. Each piece reflected fragments of her journey, fractured lines that curved into balance, muted tones melting into strength. Guests wandered through the room, champagne flutes glinting in soft light. Clara stood near one of her displays, her posture graceful, her laughter soft but sure. Harrison stayed nearby, greeting patrons with an easy smile but never far from her side. And then Ethan walked in. He hadn't been invited. He wore his charm like armor, greeting staff with a too-bright smile, shaking hands as if he belonged there. But his eyes were fixed on her. When Clara noticed him, her breath caught. Not out of fear, but disbelief. He looked the same, yet smaller somehow. The self-importance that once filled every room now seemed out of place among people who didn't care who he was. "Clara," he said smoothly, stepping forward. "Didn't think I'd get the pleasure of seeing you again." Her pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. "Ethan, I didn't realize you were invited." He smirked. "Guess I have my ways." Harrison turned slightly, reading the tension instantly. "Everything all right here?" Ethan's eyes flicked toward him. The famous Mr. Grant. "I should thank you. Seems you've given my ex-wife quite the makeover." The room quieted, just enough for nearby guests to sense the shift. Clara's voice stayed calm, steady. "It's not a makeover, Ethan. It's called becoming who I was always meant to be." He chuckled, low and bitter. "Right. So that's what this is? Reinvention? A pity project for the CEO who likes to collect broken things?" Harrison's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Clara lifted her chin. Her eyes, once full of doubt, now burned with quiet fire. "Don't you dare call me broken," she said, her tone cutting through the murmurs around them. "You didn't destroy me, Ethan. You only made me stronger by showing me what I'd never be again." Ethan opened his mouth to retort, but she wasn't finished. "You know, there was a time when I would have begged you to listen. I'd have tried to explain myself, to make you see me." But now she smiled, not with cruelty, but with freedom. "Now I don't need you to understand. I don't need anything from you." Her words struck harder than any slap could have. Around them, guests pretended to busy themselves, though every ear leaned in. Ethan's composure cracked. "You think he loves you?" he hissed quietly, gesturing at Harrison. "You think this is real? He'll get bored too. They all do." Harrison stepped closer, his presence calm but unyielding. "You're wrong," he said evenly. "What I admire in Clara isn't something that fades. It's her strength, her grace, her integrity, the things you never bothered to see." The air hung thick between them. Ethan's confidence drained, leaving only something small and bitter behind. For the first time, Clara saw him not as the man who broke her, but as a man incapable of depth. And that realization was her peace. She turned slightly toward Harrison and said softly, "Let's go check on the guests." Without another glance at Ethan, she walked away, head high, shoulders straight, leaving him standing alone amid whispers and pitying stares. As she disappeared into the warm hum of the gallery, Ethan finally understood what real loss felt like. It wasn't losing her presence, it was losing the right to her respect. Later that night, as Clara and Harrison stood by the balcony overlooking the city, the sound of jazz floating through the air, she exhaled deeply. "You handled that beautifully," Harrison said, his voice low, steady. Clara smiled faintly. "No, I just finally said what I should have said years ago." He looked at her for a long moment, admiration softening his features. "You know, there's something poetic about tonight. Your collection called Resilience, and you living it in real time." She laughed quietly. "I suppose life has its symmetry." And down below, in the dim reflection of the gallery glass, Ethan Reynolds watched from a distance, seeing what he'd thrown away, realizing too late that some women don't stay broken. Some rise higher than they were ever meant to fall. Success, Clara learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like sunlight sneaking through curtains after a long night. Weeks after the gallery confrontation, her life settled into something steady, something beautiful. She'd found peace, not through revenge, but through becoming the woman she had always been meant to be. Her designs sold faster than she could create them. Fashion magazines called her the woman redefining modern elegance. Her pieces were featured in New York and London, admired for their warmth and subtle strength. The world saw resilience stitched into every thread, and for the first time, Clara believed it too. Harrison was more than a partner now. Their connection deepened in ways neither had planned. He treated her as an equal, never as someone to be saved. Over quiet dinners, he listened to her talk about colors, fabrics, and meaning as if each word mattered. Sometimes he'd just smile and say, "You don't realize it, do you? You're becoming unstoppable." She'd blush, laugh softly, and say, "I'm just catching up to the woman I should have been years ago." Meanwhile, Ethan's world began to crack. The charm that once carried him through deals and dinner parties no longer worked like magic. His company lost a major client, ironically, one he'd tried to impress using Clara's old designs. Rumors spread about his temper, his carelessness, and the young mistress who'd already left him for another man. He tried to reach Clara again. Voicemails, emails, flowers at her studio, all ignored. Each silence from her felt like another nail in the coffin of his ego. He told mutual friends she was pretending, that her relationship with Harrison was a publicity stunt. But the photos said otherwise. There she was, Clara Reynolds, radiant in a silver evening gown, standing beside Harrison at a New York fashion charity gala. Her hand in his. Her smile unforced. Every headline seemed to echo one message: she moved on and she's thriving. At the gala, the air shimmered with the hum of champagne laughter and live music. Clara's dress caught the light as if it had been woven from the stars themselves. Harrison looked at her as though she were the only person in the room. "You know," he murmured, leaning close, "every time you walk into a room, it feels like the world pauses for a second." She laughed softly. "That's because you're looking at me too hard." He smiled. "No, Clara. That's because you've finally stepped into your own light." Her eyes glistened, not with sadness, but gratitude. She thought of the woman she once was, the one who waited by the window, wondering why her husband stayed out so late. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone who had built her life from her own two hands. But back in Charleston, Ethan sat alone in his office, staring at a photo from years ago, Clara laughing beside him in a moment that now felt like fiction. He wondered how she'd managed to slip away, to become someone the world admired. And for the first time, he didn't feel angry. He felt empty. He picked up his phone and typed a message he would never send. "You were right. I never saw you. I only saw what you did for me." He deleted it, set the phone down, and stared into the dark glass of his window. In his reflection, he saw not the man he used to be, but the consequences of what he'd become. Clara, meanwhile, had stopped looking back. Life had opened wide before her: new projects, charity work, and the quiet, deep kind of love that doesn't demand attention. Harrison had become her constant, a partner who admired her strength without trying to control it. One evening, as they walked along the Charleston harbor, he took her hand and said, "You've built something remarkable, Clara. But you know what I admire most?" She tilted her head, smiling. "What's that?" "That you did it without hate," he said softly. "You could have let bitterness guide you. Instead, you chose grace." Her gaze drifted toward the water, the sunset painting the horizon in soft gold. "I guess grace was the only revenge worth having." Harrison smiled, his fingers brushing hers. "Then you've won in every way that matters." And she had. Because while Ethan's empire was collapsing, Clara's world was blooming, proof that sometimes the sweetest justice is simply living well. A year later, Charleston buzzed with anticipation for the Grant and Company annual charity gala, a night that drew the city's elite, philanthropists, designers, and socialites alike. But this year was different. This year, the spotlight belonged to Clara Reynolds. Her collection, eclipsed no more, was the centerpiece of the event. Every piece told a story of rebirth, silk flowing like forgiveness, gold embroidery glinting like reclaimed dignity. The entire ballroom shimmered with her touch, a testament to everything she had become. As guests arrived, Harrison stood proudly beside her. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, understated yet powerful. She was a vision in deep emerald satin, her hair swept into soft waves, a diamond pendant catching the light at her throat. "Are you nervous?" Harrison asked gently, noticing her stillness before the doors opened. She smiled. "Not nervous. Just grateful." He squeezed her hand. "Then let's give them something unforgettable." When they entered, the room hushed. Conversations paused, cameras flashed. It wasn't just her beauty that caught attention, it was the aura of peace that surrounded her, the quiet confidence of a woman who had survived the storm and come out shining. Across the room, a familiar figure froze. Ethan Reynolds had been invited as a guest of a sponsor, unaware that the event he'd hoped to use for networking was hosted by the woman he'd once dismissed. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The last time he'd seen Clara, she had walked away from him in that gallery, unshaken and unbroken. But this was something else entirely. She wasn't just surviving. She was revered. He tried to blend in, to act unaffected, but his eyes followed her everywhere. Every laugh, every handshake, every nod of admiration she received felt like a reminder of what he'd thrown away. When Harrison took the stage to speak, Ethan found himself watching from the shadows. "Tonight," Harrison said, his voice smooth, commanding the room, "we celebrate resilience, the courage to rise, rebuild, and redefine what strength means. And no one embodies that better than Clara Reynolds." Applause filled the hall. Clara joined him on stage, her emerald dress glowing under the chandeliers. She stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady and soft. "For a long time, I believed strength meant holding on," she said. "But I learned that sometimes, true strength is in letting go of the pain, the blame, and the people who never saw your worth. Tonight is for every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. You are. You always were." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Cameras flashed. Harrison's eyes gleamed with pride. Ethan couldn't stay seated. His throat tightened as he watched her, this woman who used to whisper apologies now commanding a ballroom full of power and respect. He turned away, his reflection catching in a mirror near the exit. The image staring back was not the man he once was, it was hollow, lost, and irrelevant. He left quietly, slipping into the night as laughter and music swelled behind him. Back inside, Clara and Harrison danced slowly beneath the chandeliers. Her head rested against his shoulder, her fingers relaxed in his. "Do you ever think about him?" Harrison asked softly, though not with jealousy, just curiosity. Clara smiled faintly, her gaze drifting toward the glittering lights. "Sometimes. But only as a lesson, not a loss." He kissed her temple. "Then you've truly moved on." She nodded. "I have. My life isn't about what he took from me anymore. It's about what I built without him." And as the orchestra swelled and the world applauded her name, Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth, and it was far more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined. If Clara's strength touched your heart, don't let her story end here. Subscribe and join our circle of women who turned heartbreak into power, betrayal into peace, and endings into beautiful new beginnings. Every story here reminds you, you are never broken, only becoming. Tap subscribe and let's rise, one story at a time.